Hello, everyone. My name is Jacquelyn Sundberg, and welcome to today's ROAAr Book Club. And today it's a little bit different than the previous sessions that we've had. But before we get going, I just want to point out that we are recording this session, but the only thing that we will be capturing is the presenters' videos. So me, my face and my voice, and the two presenters who will be coming on. So you can choose to leave your video on or off, but just a warning that we are recording, and by continuing in the meeting, that's what's happening. So I'm just going to share my screen here. So welcome to today's session of the book club, which is the Bibliophile's Brushstrokes, a closer look at endocrinology by Marian Dale Scott. And today it's a little bit different. We do have an arts takeover for today. And one of the initials in ROAAr stands for the Visual Art Collections. We have two colleagues today who are going to be telling us, well, basically taking us on a deep dive of this piece of art. So I'm looking forward to it. It's a little bit different than the other meetings that we've had of the book club so far. So we're experimenting with different formats every month, and we'll keep experimenting over the summer months and keep bringing fresh content and discussion material to all of you. It's been fun to try out different formats. In January, we explored fairy tales with small groups in breakout rooms. In February, we heard from a panel of local writers, collectors, book lovers, booksellers. And for this third meeting, as I said, we'll look closely at this monumental painting by Marian Dale Scott. And Michelle and Hannah, who I'll introduce shortly, are going to take us on a guided tour. But before I introduce them, just a few housekeeping notes. We all have done many Zoom meetings by now, but a quick refresher, if you do run into trouble, you can send a message in the Zoom chat to me. My name is on screen there. It says Jacquelyn Sundberg, that's me. And my colleague, Sydney Wilson, is also standing by. If you have technical trouble, you can send a message to her as well. Or you can email roaar.library@mcgill.ca for tech questions or to send questions for the speakers. We have enabled live captions, and you can turn them off if you prefer, but if that helps, you can read along on screen. They're auto-generated, so sometimes you will get a little bit of a wonky transcription. You can, if they are annoying, move them around your screen by clicking and dragging on that captions box, or you can also hide them, turn the subtitles off by clicking in the live transcript option in the bottom of your Zoom menu. You can send a message in the chat throughout the event with questions or comments on the presentation, and we encourage that. We'd love to chat with you. So that's housekeeping out of the way. We invite you, if you prefer, you can leave your video on or off. It's up to you. Before we go further, we want to acknowledge that even though we're all tuning in from various places around the country, around the city, around the campus, we're tied to particular places. And the mural that we're hearing about today is tied to a particular place as well. It's located just up the hill from me here. I'm on McGill's lower campus today. And this mural is in the Strathcona Medical Building, which is just up the hill. And it's here on McGill's downtown campus, which is situated on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka people. This site has long served as a place of meeting and exchange of ideas amongst nations. And today we're meeting and exchanging ideas, and we want to recognize the people who have been doing this for generations. These people are the traditional custodians of the lands and waters that McGill stands on today. So it's really a privilege to continue that tradition and to bring a discussion of art to the table today. It's a privilege to be able to reach more people when we have this digital venue. So there's a silver lining. So let me introduce my colleagues and today's speakers. If you've attended a ROAAr event this year, you will have heard the name Michelle Macleod. She's been behind the scenes on a lot of events, helping them run smoothly. But today the camera is on and Michelle is on deck. She is the assistant curator of the visual arts collection here. She's currently completing a She's a PhD candidate, at the Inter-University Doctoral Program in Art History at Concordia University. And her doctoral research examines early Canadian photomechanical processes. She holds an MA in photographic preservation and collections management from Ryerson University and a BFA in art history from Concordia University as well. And also joining us is Hannah Deskin. She is the collections manager of the Visual Arts Collection. One of her primary responsibilities here now is running the Visual Arts Collection database, which documents the history of each object in the collection, from acquisition through conservation, treatments, and loan activity as well. Hannah obtained her bachelor's degree in art history in 2019 from McGill, and her focus was on public art and cultural policy, with a special focus on Indigenous art and resurgence. So thank you both for putting together today's session, and I'm going to turn it over now to Michelle, who's going to take over.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jacquelyn. Such a warm welcome. Like you said, I'm used to being behind the camera, but today's my day to stare into the little green light and just get my PowerPoint set up here. Okay. So today, Hannah and I will present an in-depth look at this extraordinary mural, helps if we can see it, by Marian Scott, titled Endocrinology. It was painted on a reading room wall here at McGill's Strathcona Medical Building between 1941 and 1943. As we all know far too well by now, the pandemic has limited our opportunities to do so many things, and this includes viewing artworks firsthand. Nothing quite compares to viewing art in public spaces like museums and gallery, or even on McGill campus. Viewing an artwork in person permits us to move around it, get close, and see the texture of the materials, or see it in the space that it occupies. All of this informs how we interpret an artwork. Art historical methodologies depend on this type of interaction because the materiality of an artwork is so closely tied to this aesthetic experience of it. During this time at home, we've found new ways to have in-person experiences, including this event, and also viewing artworks. Of course, photographs of artworks have become even more important these days as we rely on these images to see art on our screens. But it's important to remember how a photograph of an artwork can mediate our experiences. This image that we're seeing on screen of Marian Scott's mural was taken by Brian Merritt, a talented fine art and documentary photographer. This particular view was taken in the reading room with the photographer's extendable tripod and using professional lighting. It shows us in wonderful high resolution detail the entire painting, which measures 12 feet by 16 feet. We cannot, however, see or sense the physical space that it is in. The only hint of its scale is a cutout on the bottom left of the wall that's actually the top of a very small doorway. Here are some other images of the mural taken by VAC staff while Merritt was photographing the mural, and also of Professor Anne-Marie Adams' class in situ, just to give you a bit more of a sense of the mural in its room. So while we can't be in the reading room together in the Strathcona Medical Building, we can take this opportunity to see Marian mural in a new way. And with the help of Brian Merritt's professional photograph, we can see it from a high vantage point, and we can zoom in and appreciate all the details, and we can sort of detach it from its physical space. As you'll learn, I hope, over the course of this presentation, looking at things in new ways is what inspired this mural and the artist. Actually, I'll go back to this wonderful image. So in 1941, as I mentioned, Dr. Selye commissioned Marian Scott to paint this mural. The scientist first encountered the artist's work while admiring a friend's painting at a dinner party. When he approached Scott to paint a wall at McGill, she saw it as an opportunity to take up science as a new source of inspiration. Equally, Selye saw collaborating with an artist as an opportunity for art to inspire science. The topic of this mural is endocrinology. To put it generally, this is the study of glands. In the 1940s, this was a very new field, and researchers were only beginning to understand how glands produced hormones and distributed them throughout the body. Dr. Selye was at the forefront of this field. I'll show you this. Shortly after the mural was completed, Selye and Scott co-published an article in the very first volume of Canadian Art magazine. Selye's section was titled Art as an Inspiration to Science, and Scott's is titled Science as an Inspiration to Art. This article confirms that this was both a collaborative and significant project for both the doctor and the artist. Selye was born in Vienna in 1907 and came to McGill in 1932. He worked in the Department of Histology, which is the microscopic study of tissues. Under this umbrella, he began researching the effects of stress on the human body. This led him to define his theory of general adaptation syndrome. And this highly influential theory is now instrumental to how doctors today understand the effects of stressors, both real and imagined, on the human body. In this fantastic portrait of the doctor in front of his own bookcase, you'll note that on the spine of his book on endocrinology is this illustration of a chemical compound just at the bottom, sort of next to his pipe. You'll recognize this shape when we look at Scott's mural in detail a bit later. After his time at McGill, Selye went on to teach at the University de Montréal and published widely on the topic of stress. Here are just a few of his more general public books that I imagine could make for an interesting book club selection in the future. Marian Dale was born in Montreal in 1906 to an upper middle class family. She was drawn to art at a very early age and took classes at the Art Association of Montreal and the Slade School of Art in London, England. Scott was an autodidact. She was always learning and seeking out new opportunities to teach herself something new. To do this, she read books, many of which she actually found in McGill's Blackadder library, and she went to museums and art shows, all with a very sharp, critical eye. She would record many of her impressions and experiences in her journals, many of which are now held at Library and Archives Canada. This archive is an invaluable resource for scholars seeking to understand her rich and varied career as a painter that lasted over 70 years. In one journal entry, Scott wrote, "Draw, draw, draw. I feel confident that something will come out of all of it if I do. But while I'm sucking the juice out of other people's experiences, I must keep up my original experiences." Late in the 1930s, she paints industrial urban landscapes in this semi-abstracted style. Her focus on the city that we see in works like Fire Escape and Cement was a reaction to modernity, a critique of the more leisurely pastoral landscapes that she might have been seeing other artists doing. The unconventional perspective of these works, with the upward view of a spiral staircase and the sharp angles of the factory building, demonstrate that the artist was always looking at her surroundings a bit differently. Marian Dale Scott was always striving to see the world creatively. And while this included viewing the physical world with fresh eyes, she was also revisioning society. For this reason, this mural at McGill represents a significant shift in the artist's thinking. Scott considered science to be a progressive and positive force in humanity. With this work, she wanted to set an example of what it could mean to be an artist in modern society. She wanted artists to be agents of change and to create work that had a democratic function. In her writing, she urged artists in her generation to be socially engaged. Finding inspiration in science by reading biology textbooks, looking through the microscope, and consulting with doctors, Scott gained a new perspective on how the universe functioned. In an era following the chaos of the Great Depression and the First World War, this search for order was common in a variety of fields, with many of people looking for solace and harmony during a time of economic and social instability. In the decades after endocrinology, Scott progressively moves away from realism towards abstraction. When we look at her impressive body of work, it's clear that Scott was always pushing herself to explore new subject matter and styles. This variety of work demonstrates that this really was a woman who was constantly inspired by her own experiences, and she consistently sought out new ways to share them. This small selection of Scott's work on screen right now are all part of the McGill Visual Arts Collection. And as you can imagine, they're all each deserving of their own in-depth presentation. But today we are focusing on endocrinology, and I'll now let Hannah tell us a bit more about Scott's process and also her own book collection.
Thanks, Michelle. So while we're looking specifically at endocrinology today, which is an artwork that fits within a very particular period of the artist's extensive oeuvre, it's important to note that Marian Scott tried her hand at many styles of painting and drawing throughout her career. In the 1930s, the period that preceded endocrinology, as Michelle just described, her paintings were characterized by urban scenes with cubist and surrealist themes. Her representations of Montreal's spiraling staircases and foreboding factories have become emblematic of that era of the city. In the 40s, which saw the commission of endocrinology, the artist experimented with further abstraction. She blended artistic and scientific processes to create works of art that reflected the adventure and discoveries of the day. But as art historians, it's always a daunting quest to uncover where an artist drew their inspiration as they explored different topics and styles. I too was left with this question of how Marian Scott could produce such imaginative and visually diverse works of art. As a part of a research project conducted in the summer of 2019 and supervised by VAC director Wendy Owens, I took daily trips to the Montreal Museum of Contemporary Arts archives to conduct an in-depth study of Marian Dale Scott's book collection. So following the artist through her books, page by page, it became evident that one of the ways that the artist fostered her ability to push the boundaries of artistic expression and evolve continuously as an artist was through her love of books. Her collection told a compelling story of which titles she owned and which volumes she coveted the most. Some volumes were splattered with paint. One could speculate that this title may have been displayed in her studio. In another, one could find a delicately pressed flower. But ultimately, these books were one of the artist's greatest tools as they allowed her to gather and synthesize styles and movements from around the world. So if we could go to the next slide. So since the artist annotated many of her books, effectively immortalizing her thoughts and opinions, we can clearly trace her artistic influences and tastes in the era right before she painted endocrinology. One of the most interesting examples of this is found in an exhibition catalog from the National Gallery of Canada from 1934. The exhibition was called Contemporary Paintings by Artists of the United States. I have a couple examples over the next few slides that are my favorite. So based on her comments, Marian Scott likely saw the exhibition in person and wrote in pencil her impressions of each work she viewed. Here I have the example of the work she viewed by John Carroll. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to track down the exact artwork, but I found a similar artwork by the same artist, just to give you a sense of the coloration. So here the artist described that this was the most important emotional experience of the show, and she gave it 4 stars. You'll note in the second to last line, I can't quite transcribe one of the words. I've put it in a question mark, so if you can take a look closely and guess what that word is and put it in the chat, that would be very fun for us to debate later. So the artist clearly felt that eliciting an emotional response was an essential piece of the art making process. Comments like this one reveal what her priorities were as she viewed and created works of art. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So next I have a still life, and this one is by Luigi Lucioni. And again, I've paired it with a similar work by the same artist. And here the caption reads, "Satisfying in its own way, though it lacks qualities significant of this age, an old man removed from the struggle and adventure of today." So while the artist appreciated the formal qualities of this work, she clearly felt that the subject matter did not meet the modern moment. So here, the artist indicates that artworks contribute to and reflect in very, very important ways the experiences of the day. So in the next slide, here we have the artist completely doubling down on that sentiment as she writes, "A subject of today," on an artwork by Stephen Etnier. As in the last example, Marian Scott makes her priorities very clear here. Artists should respond to the lived experiences of society in the works that they produce. This work in particular reflects a very specific moment in the artist's career, a moment where she was acutely aware of and interested in subjects related to industrialization and labor. As we can see, the imagery of this landscape of a seaside train yard painted by Stephen Etnier, to which the artist responded very positively. But what can these books tell us about endocrinology, the work we're looking at together today? Clearly, the artist was acutely aware that art was a powerful tool in initiating important conversations about modern life. This was likely why producing a mural representing cutting-edge scientific discoveries was particularly interesting to her. To help guide us through Michelle's visual analysis that will come next, here are a few more examples from her book collection that show us how she turned to her books to help guide her through the process of producing endocrinology and a few related artworks from the same era. So here on this slide, I have on the far left an artwork by Marian Dale Scott called Atom, Bone, and Embryo from 1943. And on the other side of the slide, I have an image showing how the artist inscribed the name of that artwork, Atom, Bone, and Embryo, on the verso of a cover page of a book on the sculptor Astrid Maillard. While it's difficult to trace the link between this work of art and the book that bears its name for certain, one can guess that maybe the artist was interested in Maillard's classical depictions of female anatomy in sculptural form. Marian Scott took a different track in depicting this subject, opting for the internal processes of the embryo rather than its surface form. In the next slide, the connections are a little bit more clear. We were delighted to find a copy of a histology textbook during our adventures with the artist's book collection. This volume is a bit easier to connect with the series of artworks that the artist produced around the time of endocrinology. So through this, we may infer that the artist relied heavily on these textbooks for inspiration in order to understand the process she sought to depict. I selected some images from a textbook of the same era and compared it with the work of art, Cell and Crystal, that she inscribed onto the cover of her own volume. So based on the imagery of the figures table within these kinds of textbooks, the artist likely even drew visual inspiration from views of cells under the microscope. This confirms our suspicion that this was an important book during her artistic explorations of scientific discoveries and that they were very much subjects of the day. So I'll pass it back to Michelle now to guide us through a visual journey of the intricate details of endocrinology.
Excellent. Thank you, Hannah. Such great research. So this mural's sophisticated arrangement of scientific imagery and various geometric framing devices was developed by Scott's intense research, as Hannah has shown, and in close dialogue with Dr. Selye. For this reason, the artwork warrants a very thorough visual analysis in order to unpack its didactic and symbolic function. Visual analysis is sort of like the most used tool in the art historian's toolkit. It's essentially a very detailed description of an artwork that considers the artist's use of color, line, form, and material. And it also looks at how the visual elements are arranged within a composition. Before going on, however, I'd just like to give us a few brief moments to actually view this artwork. Oftentimes when we're looking at art on our screens, we're scrolling and we're flipping to the next slide. And this is very different behavior than when we sort of encounter one in real life or a painting in real life. So before I unpack this specific iconography of the work, I'll just leave it up for a few moments and encourage you to let your eyes take it all in and form your own interpretations. And you're welcome to share them with us in the chat and we can discuss in the Q&A section. Okay, silence seems so radical on Zoom, but I will begin. Often when we start our visual analysis, it's where the eye leads you is where you should begin your description. So I'll begin at the middle. In the middle, we see a central male figure reaching towards a chain of 3 gray hexagons and 1 pentagon. You'll remember this was the exact combination of shapes that was also on the spine of Dr. Selye's book. This is the molecular diagram of a steroid. According to Selye, this is the center of his research and the nucleus of many hormones. Scott has placed this molecule just out of the grasp of the central male figure. The man is the symbolic searcher or the knowledge seeker. The pale ochre of the entire mural is lighter at his extended hand, and light rays seem to emanate from this focal point in the composition. These lines splice through the spiral that encompass the entire mural. This spiral that's just beyond his fingertips has long been associated with the golden ratio. This ancient concept was used to describe and understand the basic building blocks of the universe. The basis of this mathematical principle is a reoccurring ratio of growth and development in the natural world. In theory, the golden ratio is understood as an instance in which, when the largest part is divided by the smallest part, it's equal to the whole part divided by the largest part. Don't worry, there won't be a quiz later. The golden rectangle is a good shape that sort of illustrates this because it conforms to the ratios principle. And when it's nested together, it becomes the perfect infinite spiral. The golden ratio can be witnessed in flower petals, pine cones, ants, even hurricanes, and galaxy formations. All of these natural forms have the same mystifying ratio in common. The Nautilus shell is one of the most used of these examples to illustrate this mysterious phenomenon. The nautilus is a mollusk that can be found in the deep seas of the Indian and Pacific Oceans and has existed on Earth for over 500 million years. A cross-section of this fascinating shell reveals that the incremental growth of each chamber inside of the shell abides by the golden ratio. The infinite and unexplained nature of the shell spiral symbolizes the endless quest for knowledge of our natural world, including the human body. Scott places the searching man's hand and his rudimentary illustration of a steroid molecule just out of reach of the epicenter of the mural spiral. This divide between man and nature represents a gap in knowledge. Scott is conveying here that there's still so much to learn. This was not the only time that the artist sought inspiration from cells and fossils. In the following years after the McGill mural, Scott continues to explore the human body in relation to ancient specimens. In this work, which is part of a series titled Variation on a Theme, Cells and Fossil, an abstracted figure weighs a fossil in one hand and a cell in another. These paintings were very likely inspired by Scott's time in and around McGill. We know she was working closely with scientists, seeing cells under a microscope, and also discovering fossils in the Redpath Museum. These two forces, new and old, life and death, seem to coalesce in this composition of endocrinology. The tension held here at the focal point of the mural alludes to a gap between what we know about the natural world and the complex, delicate architectures of all the cells that make it up. The scientific method is based on this very premise. Researchers make hypotheses, they conduct experiments to test their theories, and then they make refinements based on their findings. These inquiries are made and built upon rigorous skepticism of existing knowledge. So the gulf between absolutely knowing and continuous learning is always constant. The searcher in McGill's, in Scott's mural is striding forward, looking ahead and reaching out. He's even climbing spines of books that say the word why written in 10 different languages. But he's frozen in this position. He embodies the perpetual search for knowledge. This mural on McGill campus was commissioned not only for aesthetic reasons, it's also a teaching aid. While the overall composition can be understood as a symbolic interpretation of the scientific method, the surrounding imagery represents very specific biological elements and phenomenon. In Selye and Scott's co-authored article in Canadian Art from 1943 that I mentioned, Scott created this illustrative key of some of the different elements to help explain the mural. To better understand the scientific illustrations in this work, it might help for us to define some terms. So as I've mentioned, endocrinology is the study of glands. Glands regulate the amount of hormones in our blood at different parts of our development. They control functions such as birth, growth, reproduction, as well as mental and emotional activity. The major glands are the pituitary, thyroid, adrenal, the testes, and the ovaries. Hormones are chemical substances produced in the glands, and they're secreted directly into the bloodstream. Like microscopic chemical messengers, they are deployed in our blood and circulate through the body and tell specific organs and tissues to perform various functions. So at this point, I did mention that I was going to look at this artwork in a new way and sort of lean into the digital experience of viewing an artwork on screen. And I'm just switching over to a new program here. Hopefully everyone can see it okay. Good. Okay, so continuing our visual analysis, I'll start not at the center, but you'll notice within the inner coils of the spiral, we encounter three sort of rose-colored depictions of a cell that's in the process of dividing. You'll notice that these illustrations are more detailed than the shorthand illustration of the steroid. Scott was inspired by microscopic imaging of cells and felt that they could open up new worlds of creativity for artists. The process of cell division is called mitosis. In the first phase of this process, the cell expands and prepares to divide. We can see the nucleus of this cell in the very center. And the small red dot is the nucleolus, and it's surrounded by a ball of DNA, which is also known as chromatin. If we follow the spiral, we encounter the next phase. Here, the cell's organelles rearrange themselves and they prepare to become two parts. The chromatin thicken and transform into chromosomes that have two sister parts. The nucleus membrane breaks down and disappears, and these spindles form on either end. In the next phase, and the final one that Scott depicts, she shows the chromosomes being pulled apart by these spindles, which in the last phase of mitosis become two distinct cells. This process of mitosis is how the body grows and generates new cells. It's truly a life-sustaining function that's dependent on messages from hormones that come from glands. So now I'll give an overview of the various glands that are represented within the painting. Overall, Scott's strategy to illustrate these is to paint a general shape of the gland that's a little bit transparent, with small overlaying circles that show what the tissue looks like under a microscope. Near each gland are human figures that show both the under and overactivity of the gland. So the first gland that I'll start with is the pituitary gland, because it is known as the master gland. It controls many of the other glands, and which is why Scott's lines of force is what she calls these lines that sort of converge right in the center of this shape. They radiate outwards from this master gland. The pituitary is located in the very center of the brain. It sits in a small hollow in the base of the skull that's called the sella turcica, which is Latin for Turkish saddle, because it is shaped like a horse saddle. You might see here in the drawing, you might recognize that shape. Overactivity of the pituitary gland can result in acromegaly, which is the overproduction of a growth hormone. And this is represented here by this very tall gray male figure on the left of the screen. Conversely, a deficiency in this growth hormone produced in the pituitary can result in a medical condition known as dwarfism, And this is represented here by a little person on the edge of the composition. These two figures are near the thyroid gland, which we're zooming in on now. This H-shaped gland is located in the base of the neck in the throat. It's responsible for releasing hormones that control metabolism, which is how our bodies use energy. Scott has three circular microscopic views of the gland's tissue sort of embedded within this H shape. To the left of the thyroid gland, on the edge of our screen now, is a representation of hyperthyroidism. This overactivity of the gland causes it to swell, and it produces a large mass on the neck, which is known as a toxic goiter. Hyperthyroidism has been largely reduced by the introduction of iodine in salt in the 20th century. This addition of the mineral in our table salt helps us to regulate our metabolism and promote healthy growth and development. Beneath the illustration of the thyroid, which we're zooming in on now, there we go, is a closer look of a reclining woman. And when we zoom in, it reveals sort of creases on her skin. The underactivity of the thyroid, which is referred to as hypothyroidism. Hypo is under and hyper is over. So this underactivity of the thyroid is known as a condition called myxedemia. The symptoms of this disease are swelling and thickening of the skin, especially around the face and lower legs. This advanced form of hypothyroidism is more common in women than men. And directly next to this figure is a baby with its arms and legs extended, surrounded by an egg-shaped bubble. This is a representation of a child suffering from congenital hypothyroidism in utero. Modern medicine has happily made significant strides in treating this condition. As we pan out to see the entire mural again, you might recognize, I'll pause it here, another H shape as a second thyroid gland. It's at the very top of our screen. This is where Scott addresses the activities of the parathyroid. This gland within a gland are these very small white dots in the corner of the H of the thyroid gland. These small organs control the amount of calcium in our blood and bones. Hypoparathyroidism is the underactivity of a gland and can result in low energy, seen here by this, on the left, a very sort of depleted female figure. The underactivity can also cause a tingling sensation in our fingertips, toes, and lips, and can cause twitching. Scott has depicted this symptom here with these hands. Hyperparathyroidism is a condition in which these glands secrete too much calcium into the blood, so much so that it can't be absorbed into our bones. And this can result in weak, brittle bones that can fracture easily. This is also known as osteoporosis. Scott's figure at the top of the composition has multiple disjointed and broken bones to illustrate this disease. Pan back out. Next is the adrenal gland. We actually have two of these as they're located on top of the kidneys, on top of each one. Scott has depicted this triangular shaped gland, as you can see in the corner, and provided a small microscopic view of the tissue at the very bottom. This gland creates the hormone cortisol, which an underproduction of can cause fatigue, seen here in this sort of sleeping outstretched figure that's within the gland shape. It also creates androgens, which high amounts of can cause increased hair growth in women. Scott has painted another reclining woman with visible hair growth. Next to this woman is a cross-section of the testes with another circular microscopic view of the tissues. Scott has placed this gland in the lower right corner where she illustrates hormones' roles in the body's reproduction function. The ovaries are illustrated in multiple stages of development within this ovary shape, it's in sort of a bronze transparent color. We can see 4 stages of the menstrual cycle. You'll see there's a blue and red circle at the very top. If you follow that through, there's 4 triangular shapes, which represent the changing endometrium, which is the lining of the uterus. At the bottom of the mural's edge, you'll see a breastfeeding woman. The prolactin hormone, which is produced in both the pituitary, which we remember is in our brain, and also in the ovaries, causes the woman to lactate after childbirth. Scott also depicts a pregnant woman showing a healthy child inside the mother. This pair seem to sort of close the cycle of cell multiplication that we started with within the central coils of the spiral. 1 cell is becoming 2, 1 person is becoming 2. So that's where I'll sort of end our fairly in-depth review of Marian Scott's mural. I'm sure there's much more that we can learn from it. And I think that Marian Scott might have liked that. Before we end and go to a question period, I'd just like to give a couple of thank yous. Firstly, to Marian Dale Scott's family. Thank you very much. I think maybe some of them came to this talk, so thank you for joining us. And thank you for the generous permission and open dialogue you've had with the VAC. Also, thank you to Brian Merritt for his high-res photographs that sort of made this happen. We're indebted to that image today. Thank you to Chantal Montoy, who is the curatorial assistant of paleontology at the Red Path, who provided me with that really excellent photo of the Nautilus shell. And I have to thank Dr. Bruce Thomason, who is my father-in-law, and also a McGill grad of 1979, who gave me a crash course on endocrinology. And thank you to Gwendolyn Owens, our director of the VAC, for sharing her research with both Hannah and I. And finally, thank you to Jacquelyn for organizing this event and reaching out to the VAC. Thank you.
Well, you stole all of my thank yous, but we will open it up for questions. So if you do have questions about this work of art or about the other works of art that Hannah and Michelle presented to us today, I think it might be helpful if we actually leave the painting up.
Sure, yeah. I'll go back to
we
my
can talk around it. We can all have a little bit more time to dwell on it. I have a question about this painting, which you showed us has a lot going on. To the uninitiated, which I was, this is a painting, and I would never have known all of the information, the medical information that's coded and built into it. So thank you for laying that out and for giving us such an understanding of what's going on there. I mentioned this is in the Strathcona Medical Building. Under normal circumstances and given normal times, how would people see this painting?
Yeah, so it's located in a reading room. Currently, the space is now a reading room. I think originally this space was Dr. Selye's office. And then shortly after the mural was completed, he took the position at the University of Montreal. So another doctor sort of took the office, but they kept getting sort of interrupted by people who wanted to view the mural. So they've turned it into a reading room.
Okay, so at one point it was a private office. There was a comment in the chat saying that they had spent time looking at this painting in the 1960s when it was either a department head's office or some other function.
I'm a little bit jealous. I have to admit, for all of my talk of viewing artworks in person, I have yet to see this work because of the pandemic. So I look forward to it.
Yes, our campus spaces aren't yet accessible to the general public. So some are, and we have some, of course, public art. I'm looking out the window now onto lower campus, and there's some monumental works that you can see there. But this one is very much a part and parcel of the building in which it lives. And there's a couple of questions on that front. One is, how do you preserve a mural like this for the long term as it's part of the building? Do you have any comments on that front?
Yeah, so murals sort of present us with some challenges. They're sort of because they're painted directly on the wall, we have to monitor them closely. The mural itself had a small bit of conservation to it because some of the pipes of the walls were warming up the paint, and that causes what we call delamination, which the oil paint is kind of coming away from the wall. So there was some minor conservation, but now we're sort of in the position where we are preserving it the best we can, because as I think we all know, it's really truly something to be treasured and taken care of. Hannah, did I cover all of our bases there?
Sounds about right. I think the thing to add is that we manage art all across campus at the VAC, and one of our main goals is to be able to visit these works as often as we possibly can, and make sure that the space is being used appropriately, and that the environment that it's in is safe for the artwork. So we try and we visit often, and if and when it's necessary, of course, we consult conservators to give us their professional opinion about the best interest of the work.
And just a clarification question about the mural itself. You mentioned, can you just lay out what medium and materials were used in creating it?
Yeah, so it's oil paint on plaster wall. We have, actually, I was just going through our files, we have in Marian's own hand the list of colors that she used, the exact colors of the paint that she used, that she provided to conservators to sort of check that they could, conserve them.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. When someone who mentioned looking at the painting in the 60s, I was wondering what would have changed in the last intervening years. And I guess that's a question, I don't know, do we have a way of documenting that?
Again, we rely on photographs for much of this work. We're now in a place where we can take these high-res photographs and detailed shots. So we try to do that regularly to sort of monitor the work. But
Yeah. We have one other comment actually about some of the other paintings that you showed, some of Marian Dale Scott's work. One about factory buildings. I don't know if you could pull up the slide in your presentation again, but I won't put you on the spot if you can't. One comment was that was factory building may actually have been a grain elevator. So if we look at that again, could be that we're taking a trip out west. My thoughts took a trip out west when I was looking at those earlier works that you showed as well, because the angularity in the mural and some of these earlier paintings, perhaps it's that one on the right?
Yeah.
It does. Yeah, that's interesting. It puts me in mind very much of the down around the canal here, the Lachine Canal, some of those grain factories and elevators, and particularly the one around Farine Five Roses. That's what comes to mind for me when I view this painting.
Yeah, I did some research on this work. It's part of the VAC collection in 2019, around the time that I was doing the book research. And I remember taking a printout of the work and walking along the canal trying to see what angles things are at, just to try and identify maybe exactly what factory she was looking at or thinking of when she did it.
This particular work is on view in the Visible Storage Gallery, which when we get back on campus, hopefully you can come visit. That's on the 4th floor of the Macleod Library. But this particular work is due to go out on exhibition shortly as well. So we'll have to update you next time we can see it.
Yeah, the angularity I see in the painting on the right does put me in mind of what you called, I'm not sure what you called it in the endocrinology mural, but the rays of...
The lines of force.
Lines of force. I'm seeing that echo in this painting as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's fascinating. A follow-up question. Someone is asking once again for the dimensions of the mural. Would you mind repeating that?
12 by 16 feet.
Oh, wow.
It's quite big, and the room actually isn't that big. So I imagine, maybe Mark can speak to it since he's been in the room, it's quite imposing, and you sort of have to look up at it, which is why I thought that Ryan Merritt's photograph is such a unique experience for us to come zoom in on the artwork from that vantage point.
We have one other question about Marian's sketchbooks, actually. Are they in, where can we find those sketchbooks? Are there any in the McGill collections, or do we look elsewhere?
Good question. I didn't come across any sketchbooks in the book research that I looked at, but Michelle, do you happen to know?
They are at Library and Archives Canada.
Well, thank you. I think that's about all the time we have today. So thank you everyone for coming and hearing about this extraordinary mural that we see once again on screen. Hopefully we'll have the chance to come in person in the not too distant future to see this artwork and so many others in the collection in person. Thank you once again for presenting, Michelle, Hannah, for giving us a tour of this artwork and for giving us a very different experience of what a relationship with books can mean, and seeing such a visual presentation of a person's interaction with books and with medicine. So thank you to you both for such an interesting presentation. A couple other thank yous I have to add. One is to our behind the scenes help, Sydney Wilson, today. She's helping things run smoothly. So thanks, Sydney, for helping us get these things live and without any obvious hiccups. One final thank you. Our events are possible because of the support of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, and because of the support of private donors. Two in particular who have supported this series of events are Ron Harvey and Doug Bagley. So thank you very much for the support that lets these events take place. So thank you all for coming. We hope to see you at the next meeting of the book club. We're going to be having about one session a month over the summer. Some of them will be synchronous at one time, and we'll be sending out those details for May and June shortly. If you are interested in further events, you can always sign up for our mailing list, and we'll send out those links in the follow-up. Another way of interacting with our collections, of course, is if you want a tactile experience these days, you can order a copy of our latest book, which is called Amaze, a McGill A to Z experience. The book launched last week, and it features some elements of from the visual arts collection and the ROAAr collections more generally. So you'll have a tactile experience of flipping through that book, which is a work of art in itself. So thanks everyone, and we'll sign off there.